When Barron Trump gave up his first-class seat for an elderly veteran, no one could have predicted the shocking revelation that would unfold mid-flight. What began as a simple act of kindness transformed into a moment that left the entire plane in stunned silence. The cabin buzzed with the usual sounds of chatter and rustling luggage as passengers prepared for takeoff. Outside, the brisk morning air at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport promised a routine journey. But Flight 247 to Newark was about to become anything but ordinary. Among the passengers was a young man seated in first class, a face that many instantly recognized, although his demeanor made it clear he hoped they wouldn't. Barron Trump, now a teenager towering over 6 feet, sat quietly by the window, thumbing through a hardcover book. Unlike others in his family, he seldom appeared in the public eye, but the name on his boarding pass made attention inevitable. Across the aisle, an elderly man in his late 70s shuffled to the economy section. His silver hair was neatly combed, his back slightly hunched, and his gait deliberate as he clutched his boarding pass in one hand and an aged leather duffel bag in the other. Passengers exchanged glances as he passed, his military jacket adorned with faded patches and medals telling a story of service and sacrifice. Some whispered, curious about his past, while others admired the quiet dignity in his stride. He took a seat near the back, wedged between a chatty businessman and a restless toddler. Meanwhile, flight attendants moved briskly down the aisles, ensuring everyone was seated for takeoff. Just as the cabin door closed, a ripple of tension spread through the air. The elderly veteran's seatmate had become visibly upset, insisting he needed a different seat. The veteran apologized for the inconvenience, drawing Barron's attention from his comfortable spot in first class. Barron leaned slightly into the aisle, furrowing his brows in thought, then pressed the call button for a flight attendant. "Excuse me," he said softly. When she arrived, he asked, "Can I switch seats with the gentleman in the military jacket?" The flight attendant blinked, surprised, as passengers in first class glanced up. Curiosity piqued. The young Trump's offer was unexpected, especially in a world where privilege often went unchallenged. But his expression was earnest, and his tone left no room for negotiation. "Let me check," the attendant replied, surprised as she moved toward the back of the plane. As Barron stood to grab his carry-on, whispers began to grow louder in first class. A woman across the aisle leaned toward him, saying, "You don't have to do that, you know. You paid for the seat." Barron simply smiled and shrugged. Some people deserve it more. What happened next would change the tone of the entire flight. The flight attendant returned shortly after, her expression a mix of curiosity and admiration. "He said he'd be happy to switch," she informed Barron, her voice trembling slightly. It wasn't every day that someone, especially a teenager with a name that turned heads, voluntarily gave up a first-class seat. Barron nodded politely, grabbing his bag and making his way down the aisle. Passengers whispered as he passed, some nudging each other to confirm what they were witnessing. A few even reached for their phones to snap photos. Barron seemed unaffected by the attention, focused solely on the man now seated near the back. When Barron reached the elderly veteran, the man looked up, confused. "Are you sure, young man?" he asked, his voice weathered but firm. "You don't have to do this for me." "I want to," Barron replied, extending his hand. "Thank you for your service. Please take my seat." The veteran hesitated, but then shook Barron's hand firmly. "Well, thank you. That's mighty kind of you." As the veteran made his way to first class, murmurs spread among the passengers. A young mother in row 15 whispered to her daughter, "Did you see that? He just gave up his seat." The businessman next to Barron raised an eyebrow. "Never seen anything like that on a flight," he muttered. Barron slid into the now vacant economy seat, adjusting his tall frame to fit the tighter space. He seemed completely at ease, ignoring the scattered stares from fellow passengers. A flight attendant passed by and discreetly asked if he needed anything, but Barron simply shook his head and opened his book again. In first class, the veteran settled into the plush seat, visibly overwhelmed by the comfort and unexpected kindness. He adjusted the armrest, his hands trembling slightly. A flight attendant approached, offering a complimentary drink and a warm blanket. "You should have this seat," she explained. The veteran smiled faintly. "It's been years since I've been treated like this," he murmured, glancing back toward the economy section where Barron sat, absorbed in his book. The small gesture had a monumental impact. For a moment, the cabin seemed to exhale as the tension of boarding dissipated. As the plane taxied onto the runway, the engines roared to life, but the story was far from over. What seemed like a simple act of kindness was about to take an unexpected turn. And then the veteran spoke. The flight reached cruising altitude, the soft hum of the engines filling the cabin. Flight attendants moved through the aisles with drinks and snacks, but the atmosphere was anything but routine. Passengers couldn't stop glancing between Barron in the economy section and the elderly veteran in first class. Whispers of admiration spread, but the story was just beginning to unfold. The veteran sat quietly at first, sipping his water and staring out the window, his hands resting on his lap with the faintest tremor visible. Then, as if compelled by the weight of the moment, he turned to the woman seated next to him, a middle-aged passenger with kind eyes. "I have to say something," he began, his voice just loud enough to be heard. The woman looked at him curiously. The veteran adjusted the small pin on his lapel, a purple heart, and sighed deeply. "That young man who gave me this seat? His family saved my life once." The woman blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" she asked. The veteran leaned back, his voice steadier as he began his story. "It was decades ago during the Vietnam War. I was stationed overseas, far from home, with no family support. I'd been shot twice in the leg. When I finally got back to the States, I was lost, no direction, no purpose, nothing." His voice wavered, but he continued. "I ended up in New York, trying to rebuild my life. I didn't have a place to stay, barely enough for food. One day, I ran into a man outside a diner. He saw me struggling. He didn't just hand me $1 and walk away. He sat with me and listened to my story. That man was Donald Trump's father, Fred." The woman's eyes widened, and a few nearby passengers leaned in. "Fred Trump?" she asked. The veteran nodded, his expression wistful. "Yes. He didn't owe me anything, but he made sure I had a roof over my head and a job to get back on my feet. He never asked for anything in return. He just told me, 'You serve this country. It's the least we can do.' I'll never forget those words." The conversation had caught the attention of several passengers in first class, and the story began to ripple through the cabin. The veteran's voice grew stronger as his eyes misted with gratitude. "I always wanted to thank his family, but I never got the chance. Life moved on, and I thought the moment was lost forever. And now, today, that man's grandson. He's given me a gift I'll never forget." What are the odds of something like this happening? Meanwhile, in economy, Barron remained oblivious to the growing buzz around the plane. Engrossed in his book, his long legs awkwardly tucked into the cramped space, he didn't sense the shift in atmosphere. But in first class, the veteran's revelations sparked something deeper. Passengers exchanged glances, murmuring in amazement. One of the flight attendants leaned toward the veteran. "Would you like me to tell him what you just shared?" she asked softly. The veteran hesitated, then shook his head. "No, not yet. Let the boy have his piece. He doesn't need to know how much this means to me, not right now." Yet, the passengers couldn't contain their astonishment. What started as a simple act of kindness had evolved into something that felt like destiny, something larger than anyone had expected. And then, something even more remarkable happened. The veteran sat quietly for a few moments, his story lingering in the air. Nearby, passengers exchanged glances, some leaning in to share their own thoughts. The flight had transformed from a routine journey into something far more profound. Then, the man seated directly across from the veteran spoke up. He was in his early 40s, with a tired but approachable face. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "But your story really hit home. My grandfather served in Vietnam too. He used to talk about how much it meant when people back home cared enough to help. Hearing what Fred Trump did for you, well, that's rare. Too rare." The veteran nodded, a faint smile curling his lips. "It's the little things, son. People don't realize how far a small act of kindness can go. Back then, I thought my life was over, but that man's generosity gave me a second chance. Across the aisle, a young mother cradling a sleeping toddler chimed in. You know, my dad used to say the same thing. He wasn't a veteran, but he always told me that when someone lifts you up, even just a little, you pass it on. It's like a chain reaction. What Barron did today, it's proof that kindness still matters. The veteran's eyes softened as he listened. It's true. And it's not just about big gestures. Sometimes, just being seen, being acknowledged, can change everything. That's what Fred Trump did for me, and it's what his grandson has done for me again today. The passengers continued to share their stories, each more heartfelt than the last. A flight attendant, visibly moved, sat on the armrest of an empty seat near the veteran. I wasn't planning to say anything, she admitted. But my brother served in Iraq. He didn't talk much about it, but when he came home, he told me that the people who stopped to thank him or helped him out in small ways, those were the moments that stuck with him. Sometimes, those moments were the only thing keeping him going. The veteran nodded in understanding, his expression a mix of empathy and quiet pride. Your brother's right. It's the little things that keep you grounded when everything else feels like it's falling apart. Meanwhile, in economy, Barron noticed a few passengers glancing back at him, their faces a mix of awe and gratitude. He didn't fully understand the context of what was happening, but he offered a polite nod to one woman who smiled at him. His gesture, though small, had set off a cascade of reflections and connections no one on that flight could have predicted. The veteran turned to the flight attendant. You know, he said, I've always believed that gratitude doesn't just stop with the person who helps you. It grows. Fred Trump helped me rebuild my life, and I've spent every day since trying to honor that by helping others. Today, Barron reminded me of that mission. It's funny how life works, isn't it? The plane hit a patch of turbulence, jolting everyone slightly, but the mood in the cabin remained steady. The conversations felt like a shared catharsis, as if everyone on board was connected by an invisible thread of kindness, gratitude, and human resilience. Just as the plane began its descent, the most unexpected moment unfolded. The conversations in first class quieted. The veteran sat with his hands folded, staring out of the window, deep in thought. Across the cabin, passengers exchanged knowing glances, still marveling at the unusual turn of events. As the captain announced the final approach, the flight attendant who had been listening earlier approached Barron in economy. She knelt slightly to meet his eye level and spoke softly. I wanted to let you know that the gentleman you gave your seat to shared something extraordinary about your family. Would you like to hear it? Barron looked up from his book, curiosity piqued. He closed the cover slowly, the title unreadable to those around him. Sure, he replied simply, his tone calm but intrigued. The attendant hesitated before speaking. Years ago, your grandfather, Fred Trump, helped him when he was at his lowest point. Your grandfather gave him a place to live and a job, expecting nothing in return. And today, you did something for him that reminded him of that kindness. For a moment, Barron didn't speak. His expression remained composed, but his eyes softened as the weight of the revelation settled over him. Finally, he said, That's something, isn't it? The flight attendant smiled. It is. I thought you should know. As the plane touched down, the veteran stood, preparing to disembark. To everyone's surprise, he walked directly to the economy section, his eyes scanning the rows until they landed on Barron. The young man, now standing to retrieve his bag, looked up in surprise. The veteran extended his hand. Young man, I wanted to thank you face to face. What you did today, it brought me full circle. Your family has a history of kindness, and you've carried that forward. Never forget how much these moments matter. Barron shook his hand firmly. I didn't do anything special, sir. You deserved it. The cabin was silent as passengers watched the exchange unfold with rapt attention. Some had tears in their eyes, others wore thoughtful smiles. The connection between these two men, generations apart, felt like a living testament to the power of empathy and gratitude. As the passengers disembarked, many paused to thank Barron for his gesture, while others approached the veteran, offering handshakes and words of gratitude for his service. The atmosphere was unlike anything anyone had experienced on a flight before. At the gate, the veteran turned once more before leaving, tipping his hat toward Barron. "You've got a good heart, son. Don't ever lose that." Barron nodded, his usual reserved demeanor softening just enough to show the impact of the words. As he walked toward baggage claim, he pulled out his phone, typed a brief message, hesitated, and then hit send. The text read, "Grandpa would have been proud of today." This story reminds us that even the smallest act of kindness can create a ripple effect, connecting hearts and changing lives in ways we never imagine. Gratitude, compassion, and empathy. These timeless values unite us and leave a lasting impact. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Let's spread the message that kindness still matters. And for more inspiring tales like this one, make sure to subscribe to Alex Stories. Join us next time for another unforgettable journey that will touch your heart and spark your imagination.